Everything rises and falls on leadership. The ability to lead well is fueled by living your cause and purpose. This podcast will equip you with the tools to do just that. Live and lead with cause and purpose. And now, author of the book, The Anatomy of Leadership, and our host, Chris Comeaux.
Hello, welcome to The Anatomy of Leadership. I'm excited. Our guest today is Terry Swatley. So Terry is a CPA. He's a distinguished leader in the healthcare sector, and he is the CEO of Diversified Health Technologies, LLC, which was born out of a vision to revolutionize hospice care through innovative technology. Diversified Health Technologies is at the forefront of predictive analytics in healthcare, and he's doing some cool stuff there. I could testify to it. Terry's a graduate of the University of Memphis. He began his career in public accounting before venturing into healthcare management. In 1991, he made a pivotal career move by accepting the role of president of a major national healthcare organization, marking the beginning of his profound impact on the industry. Terry's entrepreneurial spirit led him to the hospice sector in 2015, where he acquired Faith Hospice in Oklahoma and Embrace Hospice in Georgia. His leadership greatly enhanced their operations and patient care services until we sold both establishments in 2020. This sale marked the inception of his next venture, which is actually where we met, Hospice Dynamics, which is under Diversified Health Technologies. This new enterprise focuses on developing cutting-edge predictive analytics tools to enhance hospice care quality and efficiency. Terry, what did I leave out that maybe you want the audience to know about you?
Oh, goodness. Probably the most important thing in my life is my kids and my grandkids. I liked having kids, but I really like having grandkids. I have 4 under the age of 4, and allocate, I have a 5th on the way.
That's cool, Terry. And
I'll be 5 under 4.
Oh my gosh. And you're also a coach, right? Don't you coach?
I coach middle school baseball at the school my wife is the president of. It's probably the largest private school in Tennessee. I really enjoy having that connection with the kids. I take them in middle school, and I get to see them through high school.
I remember one of the first times we met, and you told me that you just lit up. I could tell that in just how you're pouring into those young people's lives, which to me kind of speaks just to your leadership. And if you don't mind, Terry, I'd love to ask you a question. I started this at the beginning of the year, left it off of a couple of podcasts, and then listeners kind of came back and said, ask that. And it's been really kind of a gift for me, and also I think our guests as well. So the question is, what's your superpower?
Well, I don't think I have one, but I would trigger it's loyalty. Loyalty to my team, loyalty to my players, loyalty to my family, loyalty to my partners. I will never do anything to my betterment that's to their detriment.
Well, we were talking, and when you and I were talking about my book, which we'll segue just a second, and you had just made a comment about just, needing to be maybe more at conferences or something along those lines. And I've reflected something to you. And as I've gotten to know you, and to me, this is such a great testament to true leadership, I think I could see that loyalty and how it's reflective in your team. And your team is a reflection of you. Like I met them at these conferences and then met you. Isn't it awesome when your people are a reflection of you, like your culture, your leadership style, and what you're about? And I could just give that back to you because I've seen that in your people. You hire amazing people, by the way.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, let's segue, Terry. So I'm using the framework of my book, The Anatomy of Leadership, throughout the year. And that's obviously the title of the podcast. And I wrote the book really as a meta framework for what is leadership, like a table of contents. Terry, we're both accountants, right? We like to organize stuff. And so I'm like, why not organize the field of leadership? You Google the word, you get 7 billion hits. And so what we've covered so far throughout the year is self-mastery, caring for others, influence, intention, and cause and purpose. And that's the first portion of the book with the definition. And then the second part of the book is the 7 M's of what leaders do. And the very first M is margin. And I couldn't think of a better person to talk to margin about than you. Years ago, I've been in healthcare now for over 30 years. The nuns, who were incredible healthcare leaders, they coined the term that's kind of become commonplace now, that they would say, no margin, no mission. I'm curious, had you ever heard that, by the way? And number 2, I wonder if you had a similar adage that maybe you used in other industries.
I love that. I love how they came up with that particularly with what nuns, how you think of them, that they drew margin into mission, which is exactly what you have to do when you're running, whether you're running for profit or not for profit. You have to be able to generate a margin, not only to sustain your operations, but to put the resources in the right places when you have the ability to do that. I guess my analogy is numbers are nothing more than qualifications of actions. So I don't look at numbers as numbers; they're quantifying an action. Because in our previous life, we still do this today in developmental disabilities. A lot of the people were number phobic, particularly the administrators and the people that were in the management and the facilities, and we had to get them more comfortable with numbers by quantifying their just actions.
That is actually a brilliant way of framing it. Let me mirror that back to you. So when you look at financial statements, what you're saying is they're almost an amalgamation or a quantification of the actions that people take. So when you're looking, so it's really a cool way of pulling all that together. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, it's I guess I go through life seeing numbers, but seeing what the actions are behind the numbers.
Ooh, that's pretty potent and powerful. Now, one of my mentors, Terry, one thing he did an interesting framing, the wake of the ship versus the prow of the ship. So when we're looking at like patient satisfaction scores or financial statements, it's a bit of the wake of the ship, and then trying to reorient people to the prow of the ship. Does that resonate with you? And would you kind of add anything to that?
Oh yeah, it's particularly an organization that's having difficulty. I had a man that worked for me named Art Trunkfield, who taught me a tremendous amount about managing entities. Because I started this, I was 30 years old and public accountant, and management wasn't my forte at that time. He used to use the analogy, change is like turning a ship, a battleship. It takes time. And until you turn you got to have the patience to allow that turn to happen before you judge actually the results of the actions you're taking.
That's what makes it difficult, don't you think? Because there's that kind of process here, what you're saying. Like, and the ship is probably a much better analogy than a car, because if I turn my car, it's immediately responsive. Whereas a ship, at least kind of older ships, right? It's a much more gradual kind of process. It's almost like if I turn the steering wheel of my car, but I have to anticipate like a block ahead or so. And so I'm curious, and I just am really resonating with your framing there, that it's quantifiable, it's the qualitative actions just baked into the numbers. Do you have any tool, technique, like how do you help people go back and connect their action to those numbers, right? Because they're not sequenced with each other. That's, you probably, I bet with your players, you don't probably discipline them 2 months after they did whatever it was they did wrong. You probably do it immediately.
Well, part of the thing that experience brings you is patience, which I am not a patient person.
You and I both got that one, brother.
But what you learn is you have to set a guideline. This is what we're going to do. This is a change we're making, and this is when we're going to measure that change. So you set on the front end the expectation of what the result will be and when the result will happen.
Do you think, Terry, as I sit here and process that, I wonder another superpower you might have, do you have an uncanny sense of timing in that? Like, I know some leaders that would do that, but it's like the leader that creates the red line and they constantly erase it, and it creates this, it doesn't create good leadership. I mean, imagine, again, the same thing with your players, right? If you keep moving we don't know what to expect from him. So do you think there's a superpower in there that you have an uncanny sense of when the results may show up?
Yeah, I think what happens is you have a gut reaction. It's like NCIS. If you ever watch the show NCIS, Gibbs would always have his gut reaction. And I think you become more intuitive. is as you do this, and particularly, I started at a very young age running a large company. It's pretty amazing that, I think sometimes back I would never have done that myself. I would not put a 30-year-old in charge of my company. And I just had that unique ability for them to believe in me. And you have to give that belief in your staff. Now, you have to hold them accountable, and you have to have expectations, and you have to communicate those, both positive and negative.
It's interesting, Terry. We didn't share it with each other, but I was 30 when I became the CEO of Four Seasons as well. and when I think of so much that I didn't know, but probably very similarly, that was the ability to inspire people and just kind of believe in people. So we definitely have that similarity there as well. Well, I wanted to ask you, so you kind of alluded to this, but I want to ask it in this way. How do you look at financials and financial resources? So if baked into the numbers is the result of people's actions, or not the result, well, I guess it is the result, but if you dissected the number, it all baked into there is the actions. And so how do you look at financial resources then when you actually look at that? Or maybe even to get really accountant geeky on you, right? When you look at a balance sheet, what do you see there besides like a typical assets liabilities?
Well, obviously you're seeing the balance sheet's going to show you the health of the company. The P&L is going to show you what's happening on a monthly and year-to-date as far as the actions you're taking. Where are you putting the resources in place? And what I'm doing is I really look at it versus budget versus actual, and look at the exceptions. So what is that exception, positive or negative? So am I put enough? Are we using the resources that we're putting into that endeavor? Why aren't we? If we're over budget, why are we over budget? What did we do differently that we did not expect? So it's not the number is just a quantification of that action. So I'm looking at it saying, why is this different? So once we start that roadmap, a lot of times I'll look at a financial statement now when we close the month in. I don't have any comments because we're on budget. We're doing what we said we were going to do.
That's so good, Terry. I don't know if you know Jack Stack. Have you ever bumped into him? He wrote he wrote the book, The Great Game of Business. And so there was a machine tooling company that he literally was going to have to shut down. And the employees did basically a buyout. They bought out the company and they turned it around. And he actually reminds me a lot of you. And then not only did they turn that company around, they went on to spawn 150 other businesses. And it had the opportunity, and they were all kind of like in an ecosystem, so they all kind of fed each other. And so I went to breakfast with them because the hospice I was working with, the CEO, actually, they were in Rotary Club together. And I'm like, this guy's one of my heroes. So can you arrange a breakfast? He said, absolutely. And so after about 15 minutes, he kind of looked over at the CEO of the hospice because I'm like peppering him with questions. He was like, who is this guy? And he finally goes, Chris, do you know we have 150 companies? I said, I didn't know it was quite that number, but I knew it was quite a bit. He said, I bet you're wondering, how do we run all of them, right? I'm like, you bet I want to know that. And he talked about upper and lower control limits on all KPIs. And then this was the punchline. They just look for standard deviation. And they ask questions around the deviation, upside, downside, upper, lower control limits. And he said, that's how we run that many businesses. And they infuse that level of how they look at financials as resources. Now, I really love your terms. Gosh, I'm gonna really, that's gonna stick with me. When I look at financials from now on, what I'm gonna try to see is what are the actions baked into that number, which is why then you want to look at the standard deviation, right? Because those, I don't want to call them aberrations, but those things off the standard, there's probably really cool learning there. Like, why were we off what we actually expected? Not that it's necessarily bad, but there's probably some cool learning baked into that. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. Because every variation isn't going to be negative. Some are negative, and you're going to take corrective action. Some you're learning from, oh, this is why this happened, and it's okay, and we want it to continue to happen, or we want it to cease.
When you were talking about budget, Terry, years ago, this is totally dumb luck. When I grew up in South Louisiana, we had, those little small concrete pillars that they use to mark. We had one in our front yard, and I can't remember where I was. It was a conference or something like that. And this guy that was presenting used it as an example, but I did not know that concrete pillar was called a benchmark. And so think about that, like the surveyor, if they walked in with their map, right, and they had go 200 feet north, 600 feet south, if without that benchmark, they would just stand there. They'd have no way to make sense of those numbers. And it totally changed my perspective on what is a benchmark, whether your benchmark is budget or your benchmark is some type of upper and lower control limits. So had you ever heard that before? I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
I had not heard that, but I understand it completely. Particularly in doing a startup. Not only are we involved in the startup on hospice dynamics and diversified health, but also we have a sister company, 4L, that's our technology arm that has a whole different platform that they do in fraud, waste, and abuse. Mm-hmm. And I'm an investor in both companies. What we've learned is sometimes we have to look at where we're spending money and adjust, particularly with a startup. We put too much in place, and we had to claw back what we're doing, because you're always ebb and flow of, do we have, how we're using the resources that have been invested in us, how we're going to make it longer, stretch that longer till we get the customers. This has probably been as challenging an endeavor as I've been involved with.
Wow. Is it because it's the technology side, or is there any learning lesson there?
Oh, I think it's just, I love to quote a Cody Johnson song. It's from the song Human. Mm-hmm. It's, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just learning to be human. And that's what I feel like all the time in the software business.
That's pretty cool, actually, though. I think I shared with you for one of the first times we met, which resonated with both of us, I think, is living life in the learning mode. That is the cool part, which, I don't know if this resonates with you, because growing up in healthcare, I work with a lot of interesting CFOs. There's some people that use numbers punitively as a weapon, and that's so almost destructive, because then you make people fear it, because that person would use it as more of the weapon, or I went to Catholic school, the nuns would hit us with the paddle. That's how they use the numbers, and I just get the sense that you use them in such a different way.
Well, I hope I'm not punitive, but it's more of recognizing when we have an issue and what that issue is, and what are the actions we need to take to correct that issue or alleviate it.
So how do you teach your team, Terry, to look at numbers? Do you do anything special? Any tips there?
Well, particularly when we were in developmental disabilities, which we still are, we spent a lot of time working through with our senior management how to recognize what they're doing, what are they, why is that number what it is. What are you doing in your facility to create that number? So once we broke down that number phobic, and it's not a number anymore, it's an action, it was much easier for them to have a dialogue on what am I doing and how am I doing it. And we spent a lot of time investing that type of budgetary process and review process in our management and the facilities. So a lot of it is, like what I do now. I've had 2 CFOs in my career.
Wow.
One was Dan Scott, who was actually in my wedding. We practiced public accounting together, and Dan is retired now. And now we have Michael Wills, who at the ripe old age of 33 is dealing with us. But he's at every meeting. We spent a lot of time getting the strategy right, and I want him to participate in that. Like Drew Brainhurst is our chief commercial officer. Drew is a tremendous person. People just, he has his superpower, people just like him.
Yeah, that is exactly his superpower. And Drew was obviously my first contact with your company.
Yeah. But what Drew has, he used to sit in our meetings when he first started with us, and he was going like, I don't understand the words y'all saying. Now he understands the business aspects of what we're doing from a number standpoint. And we pour that into him and continue to do that, trying to, I'm not going to be around forever, but I hope Dynamics is.
Yeah,
for a long time.
I hope so too. And I hope via this show, people really do look up more about hospice dynamics, because what you're doing there is just, it's the holy grail I've been searching for, which when I met Drew, I'm like, wait a minute, am I kind of reading this right? Oh my gosh, this is what I've been thinking about forever. And the fact that you guys have kind of cracked the nut on this. Terry, one thing I want to, before we go forward and talking about your team, do you hire for financial competency, or do you more so teach it?
Depends on the discipline. Operational wise, if I'm looking for somebody operation, I want those skills. And if they do not have the financial skills, then we teach it. Obviously, on the financial management side, they have to have that. But then we're teaching them management, how to manage through the numbers. So both sides of the fence have to learn a different discipline than what they're used to. Because my financial guys aren't just numbers guys. They're managers. They're managing those numbers, and they're working with the operational team to get the results that we're trying to achieve.
You remind me, there was I forget the name of the corporate company, but it reminded me also of Wayne Heisinger, because I actually heard the same thing about him before. But this guy who's in Louisiana, he actually, what was the name of the newspaper in Baton Rouge? I'm forgetting the name now, but that was one of his businesses. But he had a whole kind of portfolio. I think it was like 20-something businesses, somewhere between 15 and 20. But he only hired CPAs as the head of those businesses. I'd never heard of that before. And then a friend of mine I met not long after that, he actually ran an interesting, almost like an investment broker business for Wayne Heisinger, who owns the Marlins and a bunch of other companies in Florida. And apparently he did the same thing. And this friend of mine was a CPA. And so I don't know if that resonates with you. I mean, at one level, having grown up as a CPA, you see a lot of different types. I can see some wisdom in that, but also could see a challenge in that.
Oh, there are some that are all they can see is the number.
Yep.
And that's not a good leader. Yep. Those that can interpret the numbers and then get the team to take action based on the numbers, they're good leaders. But I don't think just because they come up through the public accounting ranks, that makes them have a superpower on management.
That is well said. You said something earlier, and I have a feeling you were using an industry term, but I have a feeling you meant it a different way. You said, I think it's your current, it was maybe your first CFO, that you guys were practicing accounting, which is interesting because they call it a practice. I never actually thought about the meaning of that word, because I think some people have this idea, well, if the accountants have accounted for it, it's sacrosanct, it's perfect. But yet it is as much art as it is science. There's a lot of science, a lot of quantitative gap, things like that. But I think the virtuosic folks, they realize there's some kind of art to it as well. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. The numbers, they have to be accurate. So you have to have that sense of, are they accurate or not? And that's why Dan was so great at his job, is he could see the number and he was able to interpret it immediately, what caused that, and what and knew how to ask the question from the operational team saying, why are we doing this? What caused this? And so his interpretation of the numbers was his superpower.
That's so good. I actually have said this to my team, and they're like, what do you mean by that? I said, I feel numbers. It's like I know some people, I'm not the one that can do the calculation on the top of my head. That's why I have a calculator and Excel spreadsheet. In fact, my wife homeschools my kids, and she jokes, your dad's not going to teach you. He can't teach you math. Don't let him teach you math. But I feel numbers. Like I could sit there and I get a sense of numbers and kind of what they mean. Are you similar, Terry? Or is that more your CFO from that perspective?
No, I to get where I am, I have to be able to look at a number and I see something different than I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. Yep. That really does kind of resonate. Years ago I was working with Quint Studer, and he had me shadow one of his most amazing coaches. This guy actually was he was a chaplain. I think he even pastored a church, but he was doing kind of healthcare coaching. And we were meeting with the head of the chaplaincy department of this hospital, and Studer was great about teaching people basically measuring what matters most. And the head of this whole spiritual department within this hospital he was antagonistic. He was almost pissed off. And this Studer coach was engaging him, and they start getting into the spiritual conversation. Like, I just feel like we're losing our soul as a hospital. And the Studer coach said, "Are you telling me that God doesn't care about numbers?" And the guy goes, "Yes, it's all about," and he goes, "There's a whole book in the Bible called Numbers. I think numbers matter to God too." And that just was like a brain tattoo.
Well, he gave us numbers. He gave the numbers to us because he knew what we could do with those if we use them correctly. So, and that's part of what you have to break down, particularly people in the healthcare industry that are clinical. We spent a lot of time with them, educating them on not being mad because the numbers are bad, but how do you correct the number?
Mm-hmm. That is very well said, and also remove the fear from it. When I look back through my career, I feel like that's kind of been part of I want to call it a superpower, but just part of my purpose is to help remove that fear and partner with them. And now you're giving me words to translate their actions to the numbers and try to be that Rosetta Stone of sorts so they can connect their actions to what the numbers are actually showing up as. Well, Terry, you've been so successful in many industries and businesses now. I'm curious, what's your secret, and does it pertain to margin in any way?
I think I figured out at a young age. I have been very fortunate to surround myself with good people that trust me and I trust them. Because I am not somebody that's a control freak. I hired you for a job. I have faith in you, and I'm going to follow up and help you be successful. So if anything has made me successful, it's not me, it's the people around me.
And then would you say that margin then was just a tool in the toolbox?
It is.
Interesting. So the people first, which I think would resonate with all of our listeners, but yet then margin is a tool in the toolbox, but not, it's a means to an end, not in the end itself?
Well, the margin is keeping score. The bottom line, any organization, whether for-profit or not-for-profit, you have to generate a margin because, one, you're gonna have that rainy day when you can't do something about the resources you're having to put out there, and you need to have those reserves. More importantly, you need to have a scorecard on, are we achieving our mission? And all the numbers are doing is quantifying that.
It's keeping score. I like that. Well, what final advice do you have to leaders about margin, Terry?
I think the biggest challenge is when you walk into a situation where you have a negative margin. And I would say that the one thing they always can do is go back and look where you're putting your resources. Because sometimes, too many times, you get stuck in doing the same thing and not going back and rethinking where you're putting these resources and should you. So when you're having those difficult times, it's really a time to check what are you doing and how are you doing it, and should you change it?
Terry, I wrote about this in the book, and I would love to get your thoughts on this one. I have found, because I've walked into some disaster situations. My first hospice situation, we didn't have enough money to make payroll, and I was the first one to find out. I wasn't the CFO yet. I became the CFO when I found out, which was a really interesting way at 25 to find yourself as a CFO. Like, am I the head of this ship that's going down? But I find when you're in a crisis situation like that, the feedback loop, now you've given me good words, the actions and the numbers are much more closely aligned. But when the ship gets righted, that gap between actions and the numbers are a little bit further apart. Does that resonate with you?
Somewhat. What I've always said to our team is, when you're having difficulty, a lot of people, it speeds up on them. Then everything seems to be out of control, and that's when it slows down for me. So what I try to teach them is, stay in the moment, not in the crisis. And it's a unique skill set to try to develop. Is in a crisis, do you slow it down or do you speed it up? Because when it's going so fast, you lose control. When it slows down, you're in control.
I love that you took it there. My son was in the Secret Service. He recently is now becoming part of a Bureau of Investigation, going through interesting training. And I mean, they do some intense simulations, shall we say? And he said something to me the other day. He said, in the chaos like that, it all slows down for me. It's almost, and I've heard like world-class athletes say, it's like the speed of the game slows down. It's like people call that in the zone. We recently watched an interesting movie, kind of documentary about a race car driver, and when they're going 200 miles per hour, they literally, and of course they did it cinematically, where it looks like, everything is flying, but like a person's in the zone. I love that you took it there. And so I think that probably does speak to your superpower too, Terry, that you're probably that calm in the storm. And then and maybe I could say it better now, the actions and seeing the actions and the numbers when you're in a bit of a crisis situation, that's what's more closely aligned. It's almost like you see the quicker, whereas when the numbers are good, it almost feels like a little bit more of a lagging indicator a bit.
Yes.
Yep.
I totally agree.
The other thing I feel like you kind of poked on, Dr. Thayer, who I shared with you when I first met, he was my mentor. He's all over my book. He said something I never heard of before. He said, every person should be worth at least 3 times their salary to their business. And then he said terms I'd never heard before, because I always heard about ROI, return on investment. But he's talked about ROE, return on effort, and ROA, return on attention. And he said the leaders that were good at ROI, ROE, and ROA invariably accomplished that I am worth 3 times. Like, in other words, if I'm throwing my impact, like throwing that pebble in the pond and you watch those ripples are creating a positive. And you have a big family, I have a big family. One of my jokes is, my wife and I had 5 kids. So 2 people came together and we produced a whole lot more individually. That's a cool metaphor. Does that resonate?
You immediately went into zone defense.
Yeah, exactly. But does that resonate with you, this concept of return on investment, return on effort?
It is, but I don't pick a number that is going to be 3 times that position. I really look at it as adding up the whole, all the actions that have to happen, and figuring out how do we get the margin within those actions.
That's good. So you found that different businesses have different potential for margin?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's some masterclass stuff right there, because you're so right. Like, I can see what he's getting at, right? If you get people to think, I should produce more than I am individually. But where you took it, which you've kind of themed throughout, which is not your typical accountant, it's about people, it's about leadership. But that magic of when people come together, they are worth more. It's not 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 5.
Yes.
That's good, Terry. Any final thoughts?
I appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed your book, and I'm looking forward to a relationship building with you in the future.
You as well, Terry. You and your team, just keep doing the great work you're doing, because what you're developing with Hospice Dynamics has so many interesting applications to improve the work that we actually do. And we'll leave, that's almost like a cliffhanger. People are going to want to know a lot more, so that's going to make them, we're going to put a good link to Hospice Dynamics in the actual summary. So at the end of each episode, we always share a quote and a visual. It's the idea is that we're trying to create a brain bookmark, a thought prodder about our podcast subject. So our listeners, it furthers your learning and growth, and thereby your leadership. And the key is that hopefully it sticks in your brain. Be sure you subscribe to our channel, The Anatomy of Leadership, so you don't miss an episode. Check out the book if you can on Amazon. Tell your friends, family, coworkers about it, The Anatomy of Leadership. It's easy for us to rail against the world, be frustrated by things, but let's be the change that we wish to see in the world. So thanks for listening to Anatomy of Leadership, and here's our brain bookmark to close today's show.
People are number phobic. In truth, the numbers are nothing more than the quantification of the actions being taken. By Terry Swatley. Thank you to our Anatomy of Leadership sponsor, Delta Care RX. Delta Care RX is also the title sponsor for our April and November 2024 Leadership Immersion courses. Delta Care RX is primarily known as a national hospice PBM and prescription mail order company. Delta Care RX is a premier vendor of TCN and provides not only pharmaceutical care, but also niche software innovations that save their customers time, stress, and money. Thank you, Delta Care RX, for all the great work that you do in end-of-life and serious illness care.